Robert Wood Johnson is returning from Buckingham Palace, where he has been sworn in as the 66th US ambassador to the United Kingdom. The 71-year-old billionaire is an heir to the Johnson & Johnson pharmaceutical giant and owner of the New York Jets.
Jets owner Woody Johnson has a new title, as President-elect Donald Trump named Johnson our country's ambassador to the United Kingdom earlier today. Woody Johnson is a blank selection as UK ambassador.
Odd. Just odd.
A close personal friend of Donald Trump, he helped raise over $18 million for his election campaign, and now holds the most prestigious ambassadorship in the world.
Okay, suck in your stomachs and look up.
Chin up. Show some teeth.
Chin up.
You've worked and socialized with Donald Trump for decades.
I think the one thing I've noticed about Donald Trump in the 30-plus years I've known him is his ability to really feel what's going on in the public psyche or what the public is feeling.
And this news now from Fox Alert. The former President Donald J. Trump, 45th President of the United States, put out this scathing news alert, really blasting the Biden administration over the Johnson & Johnson FDA pause of this vaccine. Let me break it down for you. This is what he said. The Biden administration did a terrible disservice to people throughout the world by allowing the FDA and CDC to call a, quote, pause in the use of the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine. The results of this vaccine have been extraordinary, but now its reputation will be permanently challenged. The people who have already taken the vaccine will be up in arms, and perhaps all of this was done for politics, or perhaps it's the FDA's love for Pfizer. The FDA, especially with longtime bureaucrats within, has to be controlled. They should not be able to do such damage for possibly political reasons, or maybe because their friends at Pfizer have suggested it. They'll do things like this to make themselves look important. Remember, it was the FDA working with Pfizer who announced the vaccine approval 2 days after the 2020 presidential election. They didn't like me very much because I pushed them extremely hard. But if I didn't, you wouldn't have a vaccine for 3 to 5 years, or maybe not at all. It takes them years to act. Do your testing, clean up the record, and get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine back online quickly. The only way we defeat the China virus is with our great vaccines.
When opioid sales in Oklahoma began to skyrocket, the death toll from unintentional prescription drug-related overdoses mounted, leaving in its wake broken homes, families, and communities.
The state estimates the opioid epidemic has killed some 6,000 Oklahomans in 19 years. In 2017, they sued Johnson & Johnson, Purdue Pharma, and Teva Pharmaceuticals for aggressively marketing opioids to doctors while significantly downplaying the addiction risks. Teva and Purdue settled for more than $300 million.
This was the first state trial that tried to hold a pharmaceutical company responsible. The crisis itself has been going on for decades. In 2017, President Donald Trump declared America's opioid crisis a public health emergency. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control says between 1999 and 2017, more than 700,000 Americans died from drug overdoses, and that most of those deaths, 68%, involved opioids. These are a class of drugs that include the illegal substance, heroin, but also painkillers that are legally prescribed, like hydrocodone, morphine, and fentanyl. Johnson & Johnson makes everything from medical equipment to skincare products to baby shampoo. It also owns a smaller company that manufactures legal opioids. That's why Oklahoma sued it. Oklahoma says Johnson & Johnson created the opioid crisis there.
It's a win, and hopefully this opens the door to bigger wins. But the judge the reason it was $572 million is the judge was like, this is good for a year to cover the costs of helping people for a year. And the reason the judge said they didn't give more than that was the state did not present sufficient evidence of the amount of time and cost necessary beyond year one to abate the opioid crisis, the ruling said. So one of the they were suing for, we need money to help really treat the opioid epidemic. And according to this judge, who I wonder if he gets money from Johnson & Johnson, it was only enough for 1 year. Because the investors were expecting Johnson & Johnson to be fined between $500 million and $5 billion, according to Everscore ICI analyst Elizabeth Anderson. They were going for a $17 billion, and they got $500 million. Okay, $572 million is not nothing.
Johnson & Johnson vows to appeal.
But Johnson & Johnson did not cause the opioid abuse crisis here in Oklahoma or anywhere in this country.
And we have deep sympathy for everyone affected. No, you don't. Shut up. Don't tell me you have sympathy when you pushed it. You were hoping people were going to get addicted. You profited from addiction. You profited from putting people on this drug. You pushed it to doctors. You gave doctors false information. Your sales reps did everything they could. I don't want your fake sympathy. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear corporate fake sympathy. A human didn't write this. A lawyer and a marketing team, lawyers and marketing teams wrote this. You're despicable. You're despicable if you participated in this.
What does your idea of justice look like?
I think we have to look at saving lives. You know, the lives that have been lost already, was that for nothing?
The opioid epidemic killed more than 400,000 people in the U.S. from 1999 to 2017, according to Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. How much lower could this number have been if there weren't companies like this and Purdue and all the other companies that pushed it? What would the number be? How much lower would it be? 400,000 people? There's another event where 400,000 Americans died. 400,000 Americans died. You want to know where that was? That was World War II. I just put into a search engine, U.S. military deaths, World War II. United States, 416,000 military deaths. Total civilian and military, 418,500. This is not a video about World War II, but I just want to let you know, when we talk about, oh, Russia, look at the Soviet Union lost up to 10 million people in the military. 24 million civilians died. That's what they had to endure for World War II, by the way, just so you know. We act like we won World War, it was all America. This is where I got the stats. The National Museum. 400,000 Americans died. So Johnson & Johnson and other companies like that, stock portfolio went up. And when they didn't get fined as hard, their stock went up again. Same amount as World War II.
Oklahoma also argued that Johnson & Johnson targeted young children in its efforts to expand the opioid market. The state compared the company's recruiting tactics to those of the tobacco industry. Julia, tell us more.
So it seems like there was no population that was sort of off limits for Johnson & Johnson to basically push these opioids onto. And, you know, from a marketing perspective, it makes sense. If you can get more people hooked on these drugs, especially people from a younger age, then you'll have, you know, lifetime customers, as it were.
You wrote a piece not a little while ago called Inside Johnson & Johnson's Quiet Domination of the Opioid Market. Explain how key Johnson & Johnson was and how this market and the epidemic developed simultaneously. How did they do it? There's so much that is not known about the way these companies operate with their secret documents that now come out in trial.
Sure. So the company's role was really multi-pronged. So on the one hand, they had their own opioid products that they were selling and they were marketing, and they had a whole sales force of folks who were going to doctors and encouraging doctors to prescribe those medications. But also, and this is something that I think that most people don't know about Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson had two subsidiaries that were responsible for manufacturing the majority of active ingredients in opioids that were marketed and sold in the United States, not just Johnson & Johnson opioids, but all sorts of opioids. So the way that they did this was back in the 90s, they had developed this high thebaine poppy. Thebaine is a type of opioid that's used in a lot of painkillers. And back in the 90s, they were able to connect with what is now Purdue Pharma to basically say, look, we have all these poppies, we have this active ingredient, we can help you to make this opioid painkiller, and we can supply as much of it as you want. And over the years, Johnson & Johnson subsidiaries ended up providing pharmaceutical companies across the country with 60% of the active ingredients that are in painkillers. So, on the one hand, you have Johnson & Johnson with its own painkillers and with its own sales force, but they also were quietly playing this really massive role in providing the entirety of the United States and its pharmaceutical companies with the active ingredients that ended up in painkillers and medicine cabinets all over the country.
I was someone who worked in the White House. I worked for the President of the United States. I had an up-and-coming career in politics.
But when Ryan Hampton suffered an injury, prescription painkillers led him to heroin. His addiction story, he says, is typical of the opioid crisis, driven by the drug companies.
This crisis has ballooned all over in all 50 states, and these drug makers are 100% accountable. They need to pay for the damage that they have done to our communities.
Johnson & Johnson will pay for what a judge called false, misleading and dangerous marketing of painkillers.
Johnson & Johnson, motivated by greed and avarice, is responsible for the opioid epidemic in our state. Johnson & Johnson will finally be held accountable for thousands of deaths and addiction caused by their activities.
It's come too late for the families of some.
I feel like my boy's looking down, and it's a pretty tough deal. But I think my son and Austin are celebrating today. And we got to get help to these other kids.
We live here in America, and we should be afforded the right to know that a drug can cause irreversible damage.
Americans are 10 times more likely to be hospitalized from an adverse drug reaction than from a car crash. Drug reactions are the fourth leading cause of death in the country.
The FDA and the industry are doing a terrible job assuring the public that what they are getting after a doctor writes a prescription for them is really adequately safe.
The FDA refused to talk to us for this story. Dr. Sidney Wolf sits on an FDA committee that measures the safety and risks of prescription drugs.
I think tightening up the drug review process, which doesn't necessarily mean making it longer, it just means making it more thorough and changing the culture in the FDA so people aren't so much in awe of the drug industry and instead are in awe of the public health.
Dr. Wolf says user fees are a huge problem with the drug approval process. That's money drug companies pay the FDA to get their products reviewed and put on the market. In 2009, proposed user fees will make up more than $600 million of the FDA's budget, a 14% increase from last year. It will pay for more than half of all drug reviews.
We now find people at the FDA who refer to the drug industry as their customers.
President of the Alliance for a Stronger FDA, Steve Grossman, says some level of funding from the drug companies is necessary because the agency can't survive on the current federal budget.
The FDA needs about a $100 million increase just to about break even.